Welcome to This Old Democracy, a regular podcast where we explore the ideas, movements, and people working to rescue our faltering political system and rebuild American democracy on a stronger, more inclusive, and truly representative foundation. I'm your host, Micah Sifry, and I've been on this beat for a long time, from taking on the problem of money in politics, to writing a book about third parties, to tracking how the internet keeps shaking up the system, and more recently, joining the fight against rising authoritarianism. This podcast is produced in partnership with the Center for Ballot Freedom, a cross-partisan nonprofit dedicated to strengthening democracy. Today, we're talking to Lee Drutman, an American political scientist who is a senior fellow in the political reform program at New America and the author of the important book, Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, The Case for Multi-Party Democracy. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Well, it's about time you had me on.
So, Lee, before we get into the details, just, for our listeners, describe what is it that you do at the political reform program?
Well, I think and write about American politics, and with a particular focus on our political institutions, our electoral systems. And I've been on this two-party doom loop beat for a while now, since I published this book in 2020, and I've been advocating for fusion voting and proportional representation as ways to get us out of this doom loop, and just really trying to bring analytical rigor to the problems that seem very confusing when you're in the mix of them, but when you step back, you start to see it as a system that's out of whack. And
well, you could say that you are the model of a public intellectual, someone with all the academic training that anyone could want, but also completely engaged in the public arena, trying to move these ideas. So, and that's why
you can say that, but if I said it, it would be a little too arrogant.
No. In all seriousness, we're really thrilled to have you here, and I think the ideas that we're going to get into are really important, and in many ways distinct from a lot of the discourse. But let's talk about the book, the Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, which came out a little over 5 years ago. In it, yes, there behind you. In it, you made the case that America was trapped in an escalating spiral, the doom loop of two-party warfare, which, if we didn't change the system somehow, democracy itself was in danger. So just for starters, our last few elections, turnout has been at record highs. So isn't that more a sign that, our democracy is working, it's healthy, people are participating?
Well, so public engagement is one measure of democratic health that a lot of people use. Say, well, it's good if more people turn out. But I guess the question is why they are turning out and how they are engaging in the process. So this is, there's a quantity and a quality aspect to it. And I think what's the reason that people are turning out is because the stakes are very high. And a lot of people feel like the stakes are very high because the entire country is, if we lose this election, that's it. Our democracy is over. America is over. And so if you think of people as being engaged because they're excited to participate and they feel good about the process and they feel represented, that's positive version of higher turnout, as opposed to if people are, well, everything's at stake and, I'm just voting to stop the other folks from getting into office. That's maybe not a model of what participation should look like. I mean, I agree it's good that people are engaged, but
Hmm.
people can be engaged for productive reasons, and people can be engaged for less productive reasons. I mean, ultimately, a political system at some point depends on the consent of the governed. The political system requires legitimacy to continue, and one of the dangers in this particular moment is that the stakes have gotten so high that people feel if their side loses, well, that's the end of democracy, which leads some people uh, to say, well, our side should do whatever it takes. And maybe we
Mm.
shouldn't even concede victory. And maybe we should send people to storm the U.S. Capitol to threaten
Mm.
members of Congress if they don't if they certify an election that we think was stolen. This is of course January 6th, and that's a very dangerous space. So yes, I mean, people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, very civically engaged. They're showing up, but I mean, again, there's quality and quantity, uh, and
Okay.
it's
So,
important to make a distinction there.
and to fast forward to today, the book was written 5 years ago, and in fact, before January 6th. But
Yes.
you recently on your Substack under current events, which I highly recommend, you wrote that things were even doomier and loopier, um, taking into account current polls and current events. Can you say more? Why do you think things are even worse?
Well, have you been following the news, Mika?
Well,
Uh,
spell it
I,
out for us, because
yes. It does seem like we're slowly spiraling into a quasi-authoritarian state. At a how are we doing as a country? And then when you just look at the polls, at how people feel about the existing system, trust in both of our major parties is just continuing to decline. Most people, the plurality of people in this country think neither party represents them. Everybody wants major change. So there is this fundamental felt sense among vast majorities of the public that our political system is not working. Uh,
Mhm,
the approval of both of our major parties has never been lower in the history of polling, which goes back to the
mhm,
1940s. And so I think if you picked a person off the street and said, do you think our political system is functioning? That person, chances are that person would say, no, it's not. Do you have faith in anybody who's in politics now to actually fix it? No, I don't. And that is a really dangerous place. And that is a doomy place in which you could see authoritarians taking hold. If people don't have any trust in any institutions, that's the uh, soil in which you get authoritarian leadership. And I say, well,
mhm,
you don't believe any of these institutions, so what's left to defend? Only I can whip this place into shape. Or you just have nihilism, people checking out, and the loopy part is just all of the insane stuff coming out of the White House these days.
right. Well, from your point of view, insane, but just from I'll be devil's advocate here. Certainly, I may agree with a lot of what you're saying, but just for the argument's sake, isn't, I mean, we have one party is got the White House and, Congress, all three branches of government largely. Isn't one party control one way out of the doom loop? In effect, um, if we've it's two party warfare, and now one party has in effect won, and they are in a position to, he won the election, they won Congress, isn't it their opportunity to try and push their stuff through? And that is a way to sort of resolve this never ending existential loop.
Well, sure, right. I mean, I guess one way out of the doom loop is to become North Korea, where there's no opposition,
Oh,
and
but you're exaggerating. North
you
Korea.
have
We're not North
100% government approval. No, I'm trying to keep it light here. Right. I mean, sure. There has historically, up until the 1990s in U.S. politics, there was this sense that there were periods of one party dominance when one party was essentially the governing party, and one party was the opposition party, and was a famous argument that there was naturally a sun party, which was the dominant party, and a moon party, which was the minority party. And for a period of time, you had one party that kind of got a chance to implement its policies and see how that worked. And then eventually the opposition built up, and then you had a switch. And but I think for a period of time that worked reasonably well at a national level, in part because there was still a tremendous variety of local power, and state and local politics was a lot more important to a lot of people, and so the national government was not as high stakes. And what you've had for the last 30 years or so are these very narrow margins in which neither party really has a chance to govern for an extended period of time, to long enough to really implement a vision. And what happens is they see, well, we have a narrow window to do this, so we're going to try to get as much stuff done. And then the other party comes in and says, well, now we're going to replace everything, and we think we're going to get this dominant majority if we can just shut out the other side. And we go back and forth and back and forth, and each swing in the pendulum, it goes a little bit more the intensity picks up, and the desire to knock the other side out increases, right? I mean, you have two sides that are both thinking that they should be the dominant party, and if we can just crush the other side somehow, we can be the dominant party. But we're not in a moment in which there is a potential way to actually build a real lasting majority, and unless you do some sort of realignment or reshuffling of the political system. The current conflict is essentially a trench warfare conflict, and neither side is able to transcend that conflict because of the nature of their coalition, or the divisions in American politics, or the geography of our political coalitions, or the way we do elections, or really all of those things. So I mean, sure, maybe the answer would be for one party to figure out what it means to be a 60% coalition, as Democrats were in like the 1930s. But until we get to that place, and I don't know how we get to that place, I'm not sure the solution is for one party to rule. And in places where we've had one party rule, I mean, that's not really a version of democracy that I think a lot of people think is working particularly well.
No. So are you saying then, if the problem is that we are in this hyper exaggerated state of partisan warfare where, I no longer see the other side as simply my opponent, but more as my enemy, the other side is a tribe that I have that wants to destroy me, so I have to destroy it. Are you saying that politics has to become more nonpartisan? I mean, is this problem less apparent in places where, they, like cities where they have nonpartisan elections or something? I mean, there is a movement that's trying to sort of take partisan politics out, if you will.
Right.
Is that the answer?
Well, I don't think it's the answer.
Say more why.
But fundamental thing about modern electoral democracy is that parties are the essential institutions of modern electoral democracy, and parties are the essential institutions because something needs to organize political conflict, right? Elections, in order to be meaningful, elections have to involve competing visions. They don't have to be diametrically opposed, but elections have to offer some meaningful conflict in order for voters to make a meaningful choice and to have a sense for politics to be democratic. And what parties do is, they organize the conflict. They engage voters. They mobilize voters. This is wherever you have elections, you're going to have factions. And the clearer the factions, the easier it is for voters to understand where they fit into that conflict, right? When there's a conflict and you see different parties, different groups arguing, you say, okay, I understand what the argument is about, and I understand where I fit in that argument. And parties are institutions that have historically done the most to mobilize and engage voters, especially low-income voters, because votes are equivalent. No matter how much money you have, you still get one vote in this country, although there are ways in which money shapes the options. But at least when it comes to votes, that's the one area where everyone is equal. So I think that there is this tendency that a lot of folks have to think, well, if we could just get the conflict out of politics and we could just get the partisanship out of politics, we'd have reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable solutions. And it sounds nice. It sounds like a nice fantasy, but that's not politics. It's just not politics. Politics has to involve conflict. Politics has to involve different groups lining up, organizing, doing things collectively, and parties are the essential institutions that make that possible. You want nonpartisan politics. There are a few countries around the world that don't have political parties. They're all dictatorships. There are a few countries that only have one party. Those are all dictatorships. Basic function of democracy is to provide alternatives to voters, and political parties organize and structure that conflict. Without it, it's not consensus, it's chaos. And so that's not, to me, that is a fundamentally false starting point. There is no political democracy that has ever existed without political parties. And political scientists know this. If you have weak, hollow political parties, you get weak, hollow democracy.
So the answer then is, instead of reducing the degree of partisanship, it's embracing it, but trying to make it healthier. So what is to be done? I mean, you wrote a post recently after Elon Musk, on his way out of the White House, grumpily said something to his followers on X about, is it time for a third party? One that would represent the 80% of Americans who are in the reasonable middle. And you kind of poo-pooed that. So the answer is not a third party? I mean, where do you want to take us?
I mean, it's a third party, it's a fourth party, it's a fifth party. All right. So, so again, so first, a lot of people who are sort of looking into politics, first thing they say, well, why can't we just have nonpartisanship? Okay. So that's, that's, intuition one that doesn't really bear out.
And usually there's a hidden agenda there, right? Because the people pushing nonpartisanship actually have a whole set of ideas that they think are the right ones.
Right. They, it's that's the cut government spending and increase free market trade or something. Free trade. It very much tends to be in that socially, moderate, fiscally conservative corner of the electorate, which is actually a very small corner of the electorate, but very, very wealthy and very overrepresented in the donor class. So, then the next thing is, people say, oh, well, okay, well, what we really need is a third party in the center, because both of the parties are too extreme.
Hmm.
and a third, this is the Elon Musk thing, and this is, the second intuition that a lot of people have. But then you look at the data, as I have, and you say, well,
Hmm.
actually, there's maybe 10%, of the electorate that is 15%, maybe in kind of in between the two parties, but they're not organized in any coherent way. And the closer you get to the political center, the more you get idiosyncratic viewpoints. Now, I think there's I've seen this as a thing consistently that shows up in polling. It's about 5 to 10% of the electorate that is traditionally Republican but not MAGA, and probably would like Democrats more in this current moment, but is not aligned with the Democratic Party. But that's not enough for a third party to displace either of the two major parties, because we have single winner elections. So in a system of single winner elections, we have 435 congressional districts separately elected, 100 senators separately elected. It, third parties become wasted votes and spoilers, right? I mean, people look and say, well, I don't want to vote for a losing candidate. I want my vote to matter, so I'm going to vote for one of the top two candidates. You saw that in this recent New York City election, even though there was ranked choice voting, that most people voted for one of the top two candidates, because the
Right.
energy in any single winner election goes to who's going to win. I want to support the winner, which
Hmm.
is just the basic psychology of single winner elections. So unless you can organize a party that would displace one of the two major parties, which is very hard to do, you're just running a spoiler
A waste.
candidate or a
Yeah.
wasted vote within the existing system of single winner plurality elections.
Right. Right. So to close out, where you want us to go is to move towards a multi-party system. That's the subhead of the title of your book, The Case for
Right.
Multi-Party Democracy. You've kind of made the case. What would get us there? You've
So,
talked about fusion. You've talked about proportional
right.
representation. How do we
Right.
get those things?
Right. So let's
What do
start
they
with
do?
let's start with
Hmm.
fusion voting, which was, a lot of people don't know this, was once widely legal everywhere in the U.S. before states printed ballots, and
Hmm.
when you went to the polls, you could choose a ticket, right? That's why we still have that idea of split ticket voting, where people would rip the tickets and vote for some candidates from one party and some candidates for another party. And back then, we actually did have a vibrant multi-party democracy in which there were smaller parties, populists, free soil, liberty parties, before the Civil War, and that they rather than running their own candidates, knowing that was hard to do in a single winner election, they endorsed major party candidates, and that endorsement meant that we had sort of a semi-proportional system within the single member system. Uh,
Hmm.
and there were vibrant parties. And then, once states started printing ballots in the early 20th century, most states got rid of them. Now we still have two states, New York and Connecticut, where fusion is legal. In New York, you have a vibrant third party, the Working Families Party, a small conservative party, and New York State has kind of had a kind of four-party politics. And in the past, when major parties were more in the center, the smaller parties were a little bit more trying to represent voters who didn't feel represented by that center convergence. And one of the nice things about fusion voting is that it allows voters who feel like they're not represented by the major parties to organize, and then to use that ballot line as a way to negotiate with the major parties.
Hmm.
And now we're in a moment in which it is that center that is really unrepresented by the major parties. It's not 80% of a center, but it is maybe 10 percent of an electorate that really would control the balance of power, and if fusion were legal, they would really have the ability to kind of pull politics a little bit back from the extremes. And maybe it's not one party, but maybe it's two parties that represent different aspects of a political.
Right. And I just want to be really technical for 1 second. For that to happen, what you're saying is that it has to become legal again for smaller parties to cross endorse, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they're not running their own candidate. They're putting one of the major party candidates also on their ballot line. And then the votes that candidate gets added, fused, right, to see who the winner is. I mean, I live here in New York. I'm very familiar with that system, and there's no question it does give people more choices, and it does give the smaller parties leverage and an identity distinct from the major parties that makes politics a bit richer and more interesting.
Yeah, and why should New York and Connecticut have all the fun?
No, we're fine having a lot of the fun. And then but your longer term vision is to somehow get us to where most of the rest of the world is, which is full proportional representation in some fashion.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Right.
So
rather than having, single member districts, which make it hard for third parties to compete, you could, do most elections to state legislatures and to the U.S. Congress through a system of proportional multi-member districts, where you just have, rather than each member being elected in their own district, you have, say, a 5-member district where you could, in theory, elect candidates from 5 different parties to represent different parts of a larger district, right? The question is, why do we do elections in this country based on arbitrary geography, right? We carve up states into these artificial districts, and we fight endlessly about where the lines are. This is, some of this is gerrymandering, but some of it is just like you have to draw lines somewhere, and single member districts create these artificial constituencies. If you took a state like Massachusetts, for example, which is a 9-0 Republican state, and split it into Western Mass and Eastern Mass.
You mean 9-0 Democrat, but okay.
Sorry, 9-0 Democrat state, right? Yes. You'd have
Republicans get no representation from Massachusetts, even though they maybe make up 30 or 40% of the population.
And do the same thing in Oklahoma, which is a 5-0 Republican state. All right. And what that does is it artificially divides the parties. So like New England Republicans, who used to be an important part of the American political system, much more liberal, right? Massachusetts used to have a lot of liberal, still does have some, but had liberal Republicans in Congress. There used to be more conservative Democrats, and you bring that diversity back into the U.S. Congress, and you get more creative deal making
and less of the doom loop is where the doom loop,
right. The stakes become less zero sum because there's more opportunities for coalition building. And when you look around the world, there are a lot of this growing area of political science. People look at different countries and they ask people, well, how do you feel about other parties that are not yours? And in the U.S., it's absolutely binary, right? I hate the other side. The other side is evil. In countries with multi-party systems where coalitions change and coalitions shift, there's not that same level of animosity towards other parties because, we were in coalition with them, or we were in opposition with them, or they're not so different than us, except the far right parties, which everybody hates and they hate everybody else. But that's they're on the 20% extreme. But within the kind of mainstream parties, there's not that same bifurcation of us versus them, because parties work together sometimes and they don't work together, right? When you agree on some issues with somebody who disagree on other issues, well, we can find some common ground on some areas, and we can agree to disagree. You disagree on everything, and you're fighting the other side for total control. That quickly spirals into a whole downward demonization, right? I mean, it's fundamentally, I mean, we do have in our in here in our schools, we have these very long-standing circuits that tend to classify the world into us versus them. And
Yeah.
it's kind of how we survived. We're very loyal to our group and very threatened by the other group. And that's hundreds of thousands, really millions of years of evolution selecting for that. So it's very easy for us to fall into that. And the way that we get out of that is by constantly reassessing, well, are they really our enemy? Maybe not, because we agree on this area. We can work together on these areas. And I mean, the thing is, we actually constantly want to reach across, right? There is a very human desire to reconcile from conflict. If you ever fought with somebody, well, do I really want to keep this fight going? Maybe we can find a way to reconcile. But it's hard to do that when everybody around you says, "Oh, you don't want to reconcile with them because they're evil."
And where your professional career is built completely around the identity and sustaining the spot that you're already holding.
Right.
Well, I have to say, you're leaving us with, I mean, yes, the doom loop is doomier and loopier, but at least you're pointing to a pathway out and not just naming a problem that we can't solve. Lee, just to close out, these are difficult times.
Yeah.
Personally, how do you sustain hope?
How do I sustain hope? I read I read a fair amount of history. Is actually how I sustain hope, and it's very easy in the moment to think that what we're going through is totally unprecedented, and it will always be this way. But when you read history, you really understand how much there is a kind of up and down to the human condition. That there are periods of prosperity and growth and innovation, followed by periods of retrenchment and negativity, and at some point people just get exhausted of that. And you look at American history, right? I mean, there were periods in which you go back to the Gilded Age. It felt like American democracy was totally broken. It was totally controlled by the oligarchs. Republicans and Democrats were totally corrupt and divided, and yet somehow through civic energy, people said, you know what, this is not how we want to live, and we're going to organize and we're going to rearrange things. And they got some things wrong, they got some things right, and we did it. So there is, I hate to use the term like dialectical or something. Is that too academic? But I mean, there is this kind of back and forth where there are moments of progress and moments in which we are small and angry and cruel, and then we say, we don't want to be that way. Right? I mean, there is we have this, we all have this incredible superpower within us, which is that we think the future is going to be better, right? It's this optimism bias, which is the thing that has allowed us to do so many things that seemed like they would have been impossible. And it's easy to lose that, but it just keeps coming back. And the more you kind of step out of the moment and maybe read a little less news and read a little bit more history, you realize that there's there is a general direction of progress, even though there are certainly slips and stumbles. And
I amen to that. I hope you're right, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, and we will stay in touch and hopefully have you back at some time in the future. That's it for this episode of This Old Democracy. If you found today's conversation thought-provoking, please share it with a friend, leave us a review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about our work and our partners at the Center for Ballot Freedom, visit centerforballotfreedom.org. I'm Micah Sifry, and I'll be back soon with more stories of the people and ideas fighting to renew, repair, and rebuild this old democracy, because it's ours and it's worth saving. Thanks for listening. Stay engaged.